Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-host Wilfred Riley. And our guest this week is Shannon Thrace. She is a trans widow and the author of 18 Months, a memoir of a marriage lost to gender identity. Shannon, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of the show. I've been listening and I think you guys have great conversations. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, that's great to hear. You know, we've talked about this topic from various angles. You know, we had Chloe and Luca on talking about being detransitioners and Buck Angel on. And here's a moment to say this again to anybody who's hearing this for the first time, that I have an open invitation out to all of the trans activists out there, because I want to hear what they have to say without just the sound bites of the screaming at the cameras or whatever. If they have a reasonable argument of why this is of importance to the whole society, we should hear it. But I have yet to have anyone respond and say they'll come on, so hopefully they will. I've reached out to a couple people directly, and they might be open, so hopefully that happens too. And here is another angle of this transgender conversation. Your book is about your marriage and how this kind of hit your home. And it's interesting because whatever you think about this, it's like any other major change. I don't want to make any examples because they'll say I'm liking it to that, but any big change to your relationship or to your lifestyle, it affects a lot of people. And people aren't really talking about, well, if you transition later in life and you have a family, what does it do for the spouse? What does it do for your kids, your family, and things of that nature? Because we're so focused on people living their truth, but it does affect people. So the book was great because of that honesty. When Shamika joins, and I'm sure she'll point out that how she talks about keeping it naked, and she's always really honest about the way she talks about things. And you do that in the book. I mean, I don't know if anybody else, there are a lot of people who be willing to do that. And then the topic itself. So, I guess we should start by you telling why you felt it was important to tell this story.
Sure. So yeah, I wanted to tell this story because I think I have a different perspective from a lot of people who are telling it. I am a liberal. I was a very sex positive, for lack of a better word, woman who had dated women before and who was very open-minded, and who was really kind of an ideal spouse for this kind of thing to arise. And then when it happened, things were really not the way that the narrative is usually presented. And so there was a lot of misery in the household. There was a lot of depression. Our sex life suffered. Our communication really, really suffered. Transition made my spouse, whom I call Jamie, worse instead of better. So I just wanted to kind of present my experience and say, look, this happened to me. This is what I saw. And I was open-minded and I was willing to work with this person. And I was very much in love. We were very happy before. And so despite all that, despite the fact that I tried really, really hard, this marriage still fell apart. And so I just wanted to present that perspective.
Will, anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, so I read and enjoyed the book. I actually met Shannon at the Quillet party in New Orleans. So she gave me a copy. It was a really good book. I read it on the plane back home.
Thanks.
But yeah, I mean, so my take on a lot of this is actually fairly similar. I mean, in terms of the line about sex positivity, like I think a lot of the backlash to the sexual revolution or the first couple of waves of feminism that we're seeing right now is just fucking nonsensical, no pun intended. Like, I don't think that occasionally watching porn is going to make you impotent, or that we should go back to 1973 when women couldn't have checking accounts. Like, a lot of the stuff that we're seeing from the people that are fighting gender ideology is equally insane. Like many of these people, many of these brothers believe the world is 6,000 years old. So we need to keep a weather eye on that while opposing the current social problem. And I think this book did a good job of breaking that down. But at the most basic level, I think what Shannon said here is, and I'm going to end this with a question, but struck me as just sort of obviously true. Like if my female partner said, well, what I'm going to do is begin experimenting with my gender and sexuality. So I'm going to remove my breasts and I'm going to take drugs that'll make me grow a beard. And I'm going to put on something that looks identical, almost identical to a penis through surgery. Will you remain with me? The odds that I would do so are very, very low. And although I am, a pretty aggressive person, that's not an evil or an amoral statement. It's just struck me as obvious. So, I mean, I guess the Shannon's book summed this up really well, really poignantly. But the question for me, I suppose, for Shannon is, what were you supposed to do in this situation? Like as a middle or upper middle class American woman, you're a liberal. What would you be advised to do on an internet forum when the marriage started taking this turn? Your husband's wearing dresses and getting surgeries and this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean the advice from therapists, from the liberal media is to climb on board and to applaud and to be happy with it. And if it's not going well, that's my problem. And maybe that's my latent bigotry or something like that. So yeah, the narrative very much is this is my fault and I need to work around it. There's never really any advice that, hey, this is a major change. Like you said, this is something that will affect a marriage. And if it affects it and destroys it, well, that might happen, or even a compromise. What if I accept this much and my partner gives this much back? That's never discussed. It's always just get on board or you're a bigot.
Wow. Oh, I thought you were going to do a follow-up. You good, Will?
Just a very quick one. Yeah, I mean, just like this seems to be something that reaches the ludicrous really often in the realm of quote unquote gender. So, I mean, today on social media, on Twitter, myself and the lesbian writer Eva Kurilova were sparring with someone who asked, why do lesbian women seem to be so transphobic? And I offhandedly said, well, because lesbian women don't like cocks. Like I've had reasonable dating success with most demographics of women, but lesbians don't like penises. So they don't want to date quote unquote trans women because they have dicks. And all these people started responding to me and her with just horror, like, well, that doesn't matter. If it's a female penis, it's a completely different
It
matter.
is a different penis.
Yeah, well, but definitely, I mean, like, there's advice for men on how to quote unquote go down on a female penis, and there's an element of just Monty Python level nonsense to it. I think this book does a solid job incorporating. But so yeah, I mean, so that was the answer, that you're just supposed to accept this, and if you don't accept that your partner now has vagina or something like that, you're a bigot, and that's the reason for the problem.
Yeah, I mean it's assuming that everyone's bisexual or that nobody's sexuality is real. That nobody has a genuine orientation. They can just talk themselves out of it if the person they're with says the right words.
Oh, you both said something earlier I wanted to point to, but I guess I can delay that for a minute. I got to put a pin in it and remember, because you just said that. Was it? I don't remember. Maybe it was Jordan Peterson or somebody. I saw some clip when somebody said something about this, but it is odd that is the one that, we can debate the facts of it. And I can't believe people are saying you can do this. But beyond that, it's just the hubris to say that there's one topic and there's one situation where everything is finite and nothing else matters. But beyond that, everywhere else in the real world, you're allowed to have preferences. So you're allowed to like women of a certain skin tone, right? You're allowed to be straight or gay, like men as a man, or like women. You're allowed to date people, prefer people to be tall, to be wealthy, all these other things, totally okay. But they are literally calling you transphobic if you're, in a situation that Will was describing, but also if you're a straight man and you say you won't date a trans woman, you are a bigot. You no longer have a chance to have preference. But in every other walk of life, preference is okay. That is actually, crazy in itself as well, right?
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. I mean, even if you narrow it down to sexual preference, people have kinks and they have all
Mhm.
these things they want and that they, advertise that they want, and that's all okay. But suddenly sexual orientation isn't a real thing anymore
Yeah.
just because of this topic.
Okay, and I don't want to lose because we got to get back to the book. But the one thing I was going to say about what Will said that I didn't want to forget, because Will, and I get he means it, but it's also a kind of a slight exaggeration to make a point. But when you were talking about the people who are you know on the other side of who's pushing back against, but they're extreme and they want to go back to 1970s sex roles and no
I
checking the
wasn't
count.
really exaggerating.
So you think the people who are pushing against the trans movement
Well,
don't want women to have checking accounts?
I mean, quite a few of them, yeah. If you've been active on social media today, I mean, one of the big debates is between Just Pearly Things, who's Pearl Davis, who's a YouTuber with about 2 million followers, and Matt Walsh, who I like as a male bro, but who's, I mean, a bit to the right of Charlemagne. And they're talking about some of this stuff, like if you're a man, should you ever ask your wife before you make financial decisions? And the
Yeah.
woman is arguing no. I mean, and she's saying things like, if you're a boss, do you ask your secretary before you do something? I think these kind of attitudes are actually really, really prevalent. I mean, like when
Yeah.
I made a comment in passing about porn, there's actually a website called Fight the New Drug, which is backed by a weird combo of kind of rad femmes and evangelical Christians. And their argument is that all erotica should be made illegal. Like, I guarantee you, if you polled in the right wing internet space right now and you asked, like, sodomy, if you framed it as anal sex and going down on women, should this be illegal? More than 25% of people would say yes. So, if I guarantee that, I may poll on this today.
You should
So,
do it. But I agree with you on the porn piece, but I don't believe all the rest of it. Twitter's not
I
real. I don't
I would
use that
bet
to
you
base
$50
people.
that if I did that poll today with conservative white and black men, had like Bryson Gray or someone that owes us a favor retweet it, not that he necessarily does, but I
Uh-huh.
mean, I guarantee you'd get that result. Like, immediate bet on that. Like,
But
so I think
25% of Twitter is like 3% of people.
well,
It's
yeah,
just
but it's
Twitter.
it's a it's a representative range, I think, of white and black right wing dudes with computers. Like, I mean, if you ask people, like, look up the repeal the 19th petition. And again, I'm not a
That's
creep. I don't
Shamika.
know. No, but like,
That's
I don't
all that
normally.
is. That's just
No, yeah, that's cool. But I mean, like, Shamika has some funny lines about it. But there are a whole bunch of dudes that really don't think women should be able to vote. And like, I have fun with this stuff, but I think women should be able to vote. So I mean, like, radical. I don't know about driving, but voting, yeah, like I'm there with that. But anyway, so like when you talk about something like the Walsh versus Pearl Davis debate, you have to remember that a lot of the people in these debates probably do believe the world is 6,000 years old. Like, if you went through the Daily Wire audience and were like, do you believe absolutely in a creator God that made people pretty much in their current form within the past 10,000 years, that would be a very, very high rate of return. And
and
I'm not
what
really.
possible difference does that make when it comes to what they're doing in the trans movement, though?
Well, the issue is that if you have, it's important to understand who your allies are and what people strategically want, though. I mean, like, and I think this really is pretty important. So, like, I'm starting to notice people that are on the right saying things like not. So, I usually use the phrase gender ideology or gender woo. So, like, I totally oppose teaching kids about the concept of gender. That if you're a tomboy girl, you're a boy. That's nuts. But I notice more people now are starting to use phrases like the pride movement or the rainbow movement or like what happened after feminism. So I mean, like, if you really do want to ban like pornography or sodomy, I mean that strikes me as a crazy right-wing position. But it's important to understand that many of the people that oppose gender woo also want to do that. So like there's going to be a split in that coalition between like Colin Wright and Ben Shapiro at some point. And like all those feminists that are writing like with the Daily Wire, I mean, I love the Daily Wire. I'm a male bro, like I said. But like all those people are going to be really surprised once there's a major Republican win and you see what the agenda is. Like we already saw this, like abortion is no longer a federal right. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes in that package. And a lot of it really is like gay marriage, like all the things. I don't see why I'm ranting about this one, but like gay marriage shouldn't be legal at the national level. Pornography should be illegal. We should go back to like 1983 laws. Sodomy, perhaps. I mean, like all that stuff is stuff people believe.
Yeah, I
So
think
go ahead,
because
Shannon.
a lot of people on the right feel like you can legislate morality.
Right.
And so I think the issue becomes what's moral to me may not be moral to someone else. And there's like different degrees. Like, so there's a lot of things we would agree on, like it's not morally right to kill someone. But then when you get into like pornography and sodomy, like there are some people that like anal sex. Not me. I wouldn't care if they outlawed it, but there are some
Sorry,
people.
honey, we're not breaking the law tonight. That's the law. That's the law.
Yeah. So, I just think that Will is right when he says that there are a lot of right-wing people that have some of these things that they think about that are extreme. Now, when it comes to this whole trans thing, I dislike vagina so much that I was about to be breached. They had to push my foot back up and cut my mother open. I don't want a vagina in my face. So if that means I'm a bigot when it comes to whether or not I would date a trans man, I'll just
You'd
be
be a
a
trans
bigot.
woman. You'd be dating a trans woman.
No.
Well, no, a trans
Oh,
woman
a
would have a dick,
trans,
would have a penis.
right. A
I know, but it's a
trans
woman.
man.
Right.
No, a trans man would
Right.
have a vagina. Is
Right.
that
Yes.
correct? Right.
Yep.
Yes.
So
Yep.
I'm so against vaginas. I wouldn't care about being a bigot. I wouldn't care about being called that. I would not date someone that looks like a man that's actually a woman. I just wouldn't do it. And so I think it's bad that, people are calling people bigots and trying to force people or bully them into dating people that they don't want to date. If you have preferences, you just have preferences, and it shouldn't change just because it's the trans movement or, whatever we want to call it. I don't like feminine men at all. I went on a date. Charles, you were on the phone with me. He had on Crocs. And I was thinking, are you a nurse?
I can't believe you're.
Are you Gaylord Fokker? Like, I wanted to hold my arm out so he could take my blood pressure. It's just certain things I don't like. And so if that makes me a bigot, it is what it is.
See, I told you she was open, Shannon. I told you she keeps it naked. I can't believe you saying that. I didn't say it at least. Remember that time you said you wanted to date? At least it came from her. But oh man, where did I go? I see. I don't want to say. I knew. See, that's why I don't do that, because it gets me off on a tangent, and that could be a whole nother. We have to do an episode just the three of us, so we can just talk about that stuff, because I got stuff to say, but I don't have time to say it. So back to the book. You describe. I mean, the book is 18 months because you're talking about the time frame from the day. I think I want to experiment with just putting on some clothing to I'm a trans woman, and that's a short amount of time. But was it really that sudden? Were there any signs that you think back after the fact, a little Monday morning quarterback, and say, well, there were these things? Was it really just all of a sudden?
It was really all of a sudden. And I think that's really one of the things I wanted to point out, is that Jamie really did have gender dysphoria. And I think that he acquired it. And I think he acquired it very quickly. And so that's one of the things I don't think people know. I think a lot of times people think that the trans women who are straight leaning are faking it or something like that. But Jamie really did acquire gender dysphoria, and he really showed no signs of it before. I mean, just months before, or maybe a year before the cross dressing, Jamie had a huge hipster beard, a really big beard. He was a backpacker, into video games, Dungeons and Dragons, lots of very male typical stuff. And even when he began to cross dress, for 8 months, he said, I am a gender non-conforming man. I am not a woman. He was reading things online and responding to them and blogging and saying, I don't see any need to call myself a woman. That would be capitulating to stereotypes and all that kind of stuff. And then, and he did this for, like I said, about 8 months. And then suddenly, one day in a restaurant, somebody paid him a compliment, which was, "You look like Brad Pitt," and he started crying. And so just somewhere overnight, he had started to believe that he passed, and he had started to want to pass, and started to think of himself as a woman, and that just came on very, very quickly. And then a few months past that, he was still kind of reasonable, and was saying, well, I want to live as a woman, but I know I'm not literally a woman. And then some few months after that, he was saying he was literally a woman, and his views had done a complete 180.
Right. It was totally opposite of what he was before, saying
Right.
that
Mhm.
words of violence and the whole nine.
Mhm.
You
Right.
talked about earlier being, kind of open, sexually and all that kind of thing, and not having an issue with it at the beginning. And you were extremely accommodating. And Will said, what were you supposed to do? You couldn't be any more accommodating than you already were. But, Will was saying something about, the people on the right and what they want, and I kind of draw the line between, I don't go into what I want most of the time because I don't care, because I don't want it legislated. I have my views, but I don't want my views legislated, right? I think most of the issues with what's happening now is how it's being forced on people. But I remember you're in Indiana, that's where I'm from, and as you're describing, you're opening this thing up and walking through the steps where, when he opens up to you, just the clothing, and you're like, okay, do it. So you made him comfortable. And then he went out and to do it. But what I noticed in the first, I don't know exactly, but I'd say the first 8 months of all this stuff happening, when you all went out in the world, that, off of Twitter, of course, this is a little bit earlier, but people didn't really treat him bad. Right.
No, they didn't.
I'm sure he might have gotten looks. I mean, you're in, Indiana, not the bluest state in the place in the country, right?
Right. Mhm.
And people just kind of either accepted it wholeheartedly, or they just like, do whatever you want to do, mind your business. And the funniest one is where someone felt so bad they were trying to accommodate with the gender they wasn't really sure, and he just kind of blew it off. And then later, when the mental illness kicked in and he's changing the stories, he used that as an example of when he was, mistreated and all this other stuff. But it sounded like, and I wanted you to give a little more context to that people just kind of left him alone and treated you all well, didn't mock him, didn't bother him as he was making this transition. And not just the friends, but when you went to restaurants, when you went out to the bars and things of that nature. Is that how it happened?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I would say Jamie encountered very, very little pushback anywhere ever. So his family was accommodating, his friends were accommodating, I was accommodating. And like you said, even when we went out to restaurants and stuff, there were people who didn't care. Much of the time, they didn't even seem to notice. And then there were also occasions where people kind of loved it and really thought it was cool and wanted to connect with him. Like I talk about a store where he was buying women's clothes. It was a small shop, and there were two ladies that worked there, and they started to call him by name and look forward to helping him and kind of go out of their way for him. So yeah, he really, I would say there were maybe just a couple of times when he kind of got side eye, somewhere, which of course is going to happen, but it was really, really minor. And there was never any confrontations or anything like that. So he really had little trouble, even though he did, as you alluded to, later start to say that he was being discriminated against and that he was experiencing violence and pushback and all this sort of thing.
Oh, can you tell that story about the TSA agent? What really happened? I think it was 3 steps. It was like what really happened. You described.
Right.
Then you described a couple months later. You saw him blog about it. He mentioned it, and he said something that wasn't that off, but it was like that's not really what happened. And then the third time, I think he got shot and killed or something. It was crazy.
Right.
And then he killed me. No.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So we had gone on a trip. We were at the airport in Miami. And at this point, Jamie was cross-dressing, but not calling himself transgender. So that's kind of important because he changes that later. He was dressed just slightly feminine. He did have on jeans, but I think he had on like a hairband like women wear and just some things like that. And he went through the scanner at the airport and he tripped the alarm. And there were two male officers on duty and they looked at him and they kind of sized him up and said to themselves, yeah, I think, this person might have a different gender expression or whatever. And so we need to address that. They were obviously they had sensitivity training. And so they ask him to step through and they say, we need to give you a manual, like an exam with a wand. Would you like to have a female officer do that? And he said, yes. And then this woman came out after a bit and she waved the wand and she didn't find anything. And she said, okay, I don't know why that happened. Feel free to carry on and go your way. So, and then when we got on the plane, he was thrilled. He said, did you see that? They recognized my gender identity. They were sensitive. They asked me if I wanted a female officer. They did what I wanted. I'm so pleased. He was in a good mood. He was happy about it. And then, like you said, some months later, he blogged about it. Or actually, I think it was a social media post where somebody else was saying that they had a hard time at airports. And he said, yeah, I got harassed at the airport in Miami. Well, this was the only time we'd been in Miami. And I knew what had happened. And this just wasn't true. And then, like you said, sometime later after that, and this was actually when we were separated, he blogged about it again or posted something and said that he had been harassed and detained and just really made it into a really major incident that did not occur.
I got to go to Shamika because I saw her face. Thanks for the three, but I know Shamika's probably, I know her a little bit. She's probably thinking in the Shamika way, not my way though, but she's probably thinking, so he looked kind of feminine. So they tried to be nice and they say, would you prefer to be wand and patted down by a woman? And he's giddy. What about the woman TSA? And like, I want to touch this dude's nuts. That was me channeling Shamika. I'm sorry. Shamika, go. Was I right?
You were absolutely right, because I'm thinking if that was me, I just would not appease him and want to examine him. If that's not my job, if that's not what I'm supposed to do, if I'm supposed
you are
to
supposed
be
to, you're
there,
supposed to wand the women, and that's a woman.
wand the women.
Yeah, that's
yeah,
woman.
The actual women.
So,
and so
yeah.
I just wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I understand. For what it's worth, she didn't touch him. She just kind of did the wave in front. But yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I don't think that those agents should be put in that position, especially if they don't want to be.
I have a question though, for people that haven't had a chance to read your book. What made you stay and put up with it at all, even to start with? Like, once he wanted to start dressing like a woman, like what made you decide I still want to be his wife? Or did you say I want to be his friend and help him through this? Like, were you still trying to do wifely things? Like,
Yeah, so first of all, we had been together 14 years. We had a lovely, beautiful relationship before that. I mean, we had great communication, great fun together, great sex. Just we're very deeply in love. And so that was the first reason why I wasn't willing to just give up on him lightly. But then the other thing is that when he first said he wanted to cross dress, I actually didn't have a problem with that. So what I had a problem with was the dishonesty and the things that developed, which didn't develop for about 8 months. And so at the beginning, I'm a feminist. I don't think that women's clothes make a person a woman. So to me, clothes are clothes. If someone wants to be gender non-conforming, I don't have a problem with that. And I'm also, I'm not actually into super manly men. I'm actually not even that into men. I had dated more women. And so from that point of view, it was kind of like not a huge problem for me. I thought it was fine. But then what happened over time was, so first of all, his cross-dressing, it started out kind of flattering. So he continued to have, like most of our time together, he had a short beard, like a 2 or 3 week beard. And he didn't shave that at first when he was cross-dressing. So he would, keep the beard, and maybe he would wear just a blouse with bell sleeves and some boots. And so he kind of looked like a rock and roll guy. And so what he was doing was pretty flattering at first, or at least it wasn't a turn off. But then as he got more and more into it, he started trying to look like a woman. So then he was covering his face with a bunch of pasty makeup, and maybe wearing ridiculous shoes, and wearing things that I, didn't like or wouldn't have even liked on a woman. And so that became a turnoff for me, but that still wasn't like a reason to end the marriage for me. But then when he started to say that he was a woman rather than transgender, or excuse me, rather than a crossdresser, that's when he started to, first of all, lie. So he told those lies, like the one about the TSA agent. He told a lot of other lies too. He seemed to be having delusions, which I didn't really realize till later. So he would hear somebody say something that they didn't say. Um, he started to do some of the things that we see out here on social media now, which is, when I tried to have a conversation with him, he would say he was triggered. He would say, I will not hear this, and he would refuse to talk about it. And then really the breaking point for me, or when things really started to go south, was, Jamie started to say, I'm literally a woman. And I said, look, you and me here in our house alone, I just want to have this conversation with you. I'm happy to use your pronouns in public. I'm happy to refer to you as a woman in public. I'm happy to allow you to dress the way you want. But I know you're not literally a woman, and I hope that you know that too. You're presenting as a woman or living as a woman, whatever that means, but you are not a literal woman. There's a difference between you and women, and that was something I was not allowed to say, and that was a big fight. And that's where I started to say, okay, it's one thing to just allow this unusual behavior or whatever, and it's another thing to ask me to compromise my values and my truth, and to expect me to lie to him and for him and to other people about him. And that is something I wasn't willing to do. And when that couldn't be worked out, that's when the marriage started to deteriorate. And that was really in the last maybe 4 or 5 months.
Well, that sounds like good practice for normative society, because that's what they want us all to do.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're already used to, lying and accepting whatever they say, and just, giving them their truth regardless of what the actual truth is. When I got to a point in the book that I was like, obviously this is a big strain on the marriage, but I was like, I don't even know if that's the biggest problem at this. Right. It seemed like, obviously it's part of, maybe it's part of, because I think of gender dysphoria, even from as a mental diagnosis, as this disconnect between your actual body and the gender you identify with. This doesn't look right. Okay. But it's one side of the story, but Jamie seemed more narcissistic than, that seemed like to be a bigger problem. Like it was all me. Like the story you talk about, the was it a melon or whatever that was sitting there forever? He never cut it.
Yeah.
I don't want to work anymore. What does that have to do with, okay, you don't want to be a man, you're a woman, but get a job. I don't want to work. It was, the crying that it's all about me. What are you going to do? I don't like the way can I wear your blouse? Yes. I don't like the way I look in your blouse. So now I'm mad. So this is
Right.
when I look at that stuff, like, then it got to the high school girl that was upset about the locker room, and he was like, that's a physical attack. It just seemed like it went beyond the gender thing. And then Shamika was like, this part, beyond that, you talk about your relationship past and dating women, so it wasn't a put off, but he was trying to make you have sex with him as if he was a woman, like,
right,
treat me as a woman, do this,
yeah,
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and for me it was like, okay, we can play a game here and there, but I don't want this to replace normal intimacy.
Mhm.
I married somebody that I had, a one-on-one real connection with, and I don't want to throw that away and just role play from here on out.
Mm, right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So, Will, anything you want to add? I mean, I know you probably have some interesting thoughts on on Jamie's kind of
Well,
fall.
yeah, I mean, there's some banter here. Like, I think the number of women that would want to give up normal sex with their male husband in exchange for role play with somebody who thinks they're a woman is really, really small. I don't even know what that would consist of. I did read that in the book, but I mean, like, I think there are some deeper issues here that are worth discussing. Like, the first one is kind of what the real transgender question is. Because the real transgender question isn't whether there are a tiny number of people with what you could call DSDs, like mosaic syndrome, that are genuinely intersex or whatever that society has to be kind to. The real transgender question is whether everyone sort of has a duty to lie to this increasingly large number of people. It's like 3 or 4% of high school and college age men and women that essentially say they're the opposite sex. I'm just going to discard the concept of gender here, but that are in many cases just normal looking males and females. You can obviously, the whole idea of going to a bar to pick up the opposite sex, you can tell what sex 99.9% of people are just by looking at them. Do we as a society have some duty to, for mental health reasons, pretend we don't see this, pretend you can't tell what sex people are in locker rooms or dating environments or something like that, to help other people feel better about themselves? And I think the obvious answer is no. This is like the COVID lockdowns, but more extreme. Like, do you have a duty to shut down all of society because otherwise people might get sick? No. Like, I'm totally cool shopping for seniors, but no, there has to be a greatest good for the greatest number rule. That's why we agree to follow rules at all, as opposed to just competing wolf-like with one another. No, that doesn't make sense. But that is the real trans question. What's really being proposed when you strip away all the bullshit about, like, there are no physical differences between men and women. Women are smaller and slightly smarter than men. We know what all the differences are. The real question is, do you have a duty to pretend that's not real? No, I don't think so, but that's what we're all going to be asked very soon. A second point here, a quick one. The thing that's interesting to me about gender is how old school sexist it is. Like,
Mm,
it would be impossible to have a gender or to be transgender if we didn't stereotype so many things. Like, this toy is for boys, this toy is for girls, so on down the line. So, I
mhm.
mean, the idea, to me, it's not only stupid, but kind of offensive, the entire idea that if you are a male but you like those things that are traditionally associated with women, you are not just a feminine man or a burdosh, people used to say in native culture, but you are actually literally a woman, and you can go into the women's locker room and play on women's athletic teams. That makes no sense whatsoever. And the way the gender concept is used really confuses all of this. So, I mean, I could say a lot more, but Charles, it looks like we want to jump in there with what I'm
Well,
sure is going
because
to
I
be
want to say those
great.
are two great points, but your first one was so good. I actually want to hear
Oh,
Shannon and Shamika's response
oh,
to
I
it, but I
do.
want to add an addendum to it. So again, his first one was about, we know that these people exist in small percentages, but the question isn't
Oh,
whether
yeah.
they exist, but how far we have to go to accommodate society or lie on their behalf to assume it's true. So I want your opinions on that, but also the addendum is that, and why is the answer to that any different than anything else that someone may have? Like, do
Oh,
I
yeah.
do I lie
Okay.
to a schizophrenic? Do I lie to somebody who's a kleptomaniac? Do I lie to someone who has a sex addiction? Do I lie? Why? So if the answer is no, there, why is it no but yes to the person that's transgender? Either one of you.
Right.
Go ahead,
That's
Shannon.
actually something I was going to say, is that not only do I not feel like it's my responsibility to lie to people, but is it even healthy? I mean, why are we treating someone as though they are a child who can't handle the truth? Like you said, we wouldn't do that for other kinds of people, even people under mental distress. So I disagree that telling Jamie that he's literally a woman, and yes, we all agree with that and we all see that. I disagree that that's helpful to him. And in fact, my observation was that it wasn't, because he had a lot of people around him saying those things. And the more people said those things, the sicker he seemed to get. because what happens is inevitably some 4-year-old will say sir, and the house of cards comes
Breaks it.
down, and it's that much harder for him to take because he's been lied to by all these other people.
Right. Shamika, you're fat phobic. Should we tell anorexics and bulimics that they're fat?
Listen, I'm not gonna lie to these people at all. If you are a man, I'm gonna call you a man. Now I will, if you're a man and you say I want to be called Tanya, I don't have a problem referring to you as Tanya. It's not, that's your name, whatever. But I'm not going to be put in a position where I'm having to think about the pronouns that I say. Even with these people that want to go by they, them, I'm not changing what I've learned my entire life about the English language. I'm not doing that. And so I've already decided the first person that wants me to refer to them in the plural, I'm walking off. If you don't have money in your hand that I need, I'm dying on it, I'm walking away. Period. And so you don't have to worry about me offending you. You don't have to worry about, feeling like I'm violent towards you. I'm just gonna leave you standing there looking stupid. I'm not doing it. Period.
Well, Shannon, she just said something. I laughed because it made me think about something in the book. And I made a note. It was kind of funny. There was a period, not that much of it, but there was a period in the book when you were being very conciliatory to Jamie and saying she, and I didn't know who was in the room or what gender the people were. Because there was a whole bunch of she's. It was like a group of you together. And I was lost for a minute. I'm like, is she talking about Jamie? Is she talking about that woman? Because sometimes there'll be other transgender people. I'm like, I don't know who she is. Because so that's funny.
That's one of the problems, isn't it? I mean, like I read a book where somebody referred, it was a nonfiction book, where somebody referred to someone who was non-binary and said they, and they had said something like, this person and their parents did whatever, and then they, and I'm like, well, who? The parents or the
two
person?
Kids?
Yeah, right. So that's the problem, is that when you, and I had actually another example that I wanted to put in the book, but I didn't have the opportunity to do that. There was a moment when Jamie and I met a couple at a bar. It was a man and a woman. They were just really close to, they were sitting at a table, but they were close to the bar. Jamie had come in and opened a tab. The other couple had come in and opened a tab. I came later, and I went to the bar and got my drink. And I said, that's my party over there. And the bartender said, whose tab are you on? Well, I was within earshot of Jamie, and I knew that Jamie would be upset if I said his. But if I said hers, they would assume I was talking about the only woman at the table. So you get in these situations where you're being asked to not make sense, and that's part of it. It's a cognitive tax on you and on the people listening, and that's part of the problem.
Did you make a sign and just hold it up to the bartender? Just go.
I think I ended up saying the person in the blue shirt or something.
They make you weird in that. And then another thing is, you talk about the stats, and the stats are important only because they like to say, like I mentioned that we had Luca and Chloe on, and Luca mentioned that, that sinister thing that psychologists do, that you take your kid in because you're concerned. It's like, I'm not saying it's not true. I just, need help, need advice, need counsel. And they say, well, do you want a dead daughter or a living son? That kind of deal. But they, which is a problem, but they act as if there's no suicide outside of that the only thing that causes suicide is not allowing people to transition. But at the same time, these same people are always talking about, we need to stop trans hate because the suicide and depression stats are astronomically high within the trans community. So it seems like it's high either way. But then you also say something about, I don't know in what context, because I only got a note here that said 1/3 were HIV positive.
I read that. It's more like 27% or something like that.
It's
I'm
probably less
trying.
now because there's so many more people claiming, so it's skewing the numbers.
It's
If you
probably
multiply
different
by
now. Yeah,
900, by
right,
900%, you get a different number, but that's
right,
still high. So they
right.
have all these problems, whether they transition or not, but no one's putting the two together and saying maybe there's an issue surrounding the dysphoria itself.
Right. So the number one cause of suicide is mental illness, and that would be what's happening here. I mean, there's no reason to assume that it's the bullying or or them
No.
not getting what they want. I mean, in no other situation do we say, um, this person really wants straight A's on their report card or they're going to kill themselves. So let's fake their grades. We don't give people things just to keep them from committing suicide because it's understood that that doesn't work. That's not what they need, is to change their attitude if they even really are suicidal, which there's some evidence that that's being exaggerated too. But if they are, then that's not solved by giving them more things. That's a
That
mental health problem.
that's actually one of the things that's really weird about the whole gender debate because it's become so politicized. People just seem to ignore the fact that like gender dysphoria really is. It's like a DSM-5 mental illness. Like, I mean, there's been some politically correct language added, does it cause depression or something like that? But I mean, it's one of like 160 recognized mental conditions. Like, it's understood that if you're a man and you think you're a woman and there's any physical component to that, like you dislike your male body, you're mentally ill. So like Charles's question or Shamika's earlier, do we do this with anybody else? The answer, of course, is no. And there are a whole bunch of dysphorias and dysmorphias, if I have those terms correct. I mean, anorexics, bulimics were mentioned. They're actually people that don't think they should have functioning limbs,
Right.
people that believe they should be blind. And in all these cases, we obviously don't say, well, you should go to the doctor and remove your arm.
Right.
The
Let me make you
voices that you hear
blind.
in your head. I'm sorry?
I said, yes, let me blind you.
Yeah, but well, actually, it seems like more doctors are starting to think about some of this stuff. Like there are at least two that will do those surgeries for you.
Mm.
So, like, if you say you believe you should be disabled, they'll break your knee or whatever. I mean, I'm obviously BSing there, but like, you will be made into the person you believe yourself to be. But in general, like, historically, we've never said that people that are hearing voices are, in fact, talking to God, at least in the recent past. We've never said that people who believe they're 100 pounds overweight when they're not are. So we've taken this one category because it's become tied up in kind of what people see as the gay rights struggle and treated that really, really differently. And I mean, we're going to see that challenge really soon as people like otherkin, about 500,000 people believe they're non-human species.
Right.
There are people like Rachel Dolezal that ID is being black or whatever, or white while they're black. And it sounds like a joke, but what's the difference between saying that you are black if you're Chinese, or only London did this, right?
Right.
Try to make yourself look Korean.
Right.
Yeah,
What
but what's the difference
happens
between that
if-
and saying that you're a man? I don't see one
Right.
person.
Yeah, what happens
Well,
if I go into a bank tomorrow and stand in there and say, I believe all this money is mine? I don't
Transfinancial.
think they would start to
I
throw
think it's your
that
money.
at me. I'm sorry.
I think it's your money.
I think they would
Obviously.
hate crime you right there.
You know,
I
think
identify
would
as
live
rich.
in jail.
There you go. Identify as rich.
The one thing I actually did this on my campus. Like I asked my students in one of our ethics classes, like, could I be a woman if I wanted to be? And they all said, yeah, especially the women, by the way, a historical issue for feminism. But I was like, okay, could I be, whatever, Mexican? And people said, well, you're interracial. Yeah, sure, whatever. You're pretty light skinned. And this went on. But the one thing they wouldn't allow was me being 6'2". Like I got to like, could I be like a 6'2" gorgeous guy? And they were like, "Oh, you're right looking, but no, you're not 6'2". You're like 5'9". No, you can't do that. You can't do that. So like, there were some hard lines, but they weren't the ones I expected.
Wow. Well, I want to read one important quote from the book and then find out what the response to the book has been. So I like this one because we're talking about obviously the stats on the depression and all these other things, and them thinking that the whole point of this is they think that if you buy into this belief that somehow it magically goes away. And you talk about that not being the case with Jamie, and you say coming to terms with your identity was supposed to bring you peace. Instead, you're a bottomless pit of need. I'm assuming this is when he was crying every night. But yeah,
right.
you did everything you could to be on his side, support him and accommodate him, pronouns, clothing, everything, sex positions, this, that, or the other. And all he did was say it was your fault, quit working, not cut your melon, and get mean.
That's right.
And cry.
That's right.
I mean, that was
Yeah.
crazy. That really bothered you that he didn't cut that. It was like you were like, oh my God, it's still there. It's been 3 days.
Yeah. It was kind of like the final straw, right? I had put up with a lot of, him dropping out of housework and dropping out of things. And it was like, would you please just cut up this melon for me? And he promised he would.
Yes.
And then
How do these shoes look? Oh,
Yeah.
my shoes came. My shoes came. No, it literally was. Some package came. So what was
Yeah.
what has been the reception of the book?
I have really great reviews. I've gotten really great emails. I haven't gotten a lot of hate, surprisingly. The only thing I'm struggling with a little is that it's very hard to get press. So, yeah, I'm.
I have to pass it on to some people. Then you should be on some other shows.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, it's well, especially like book reviews, editorials. It's been very hard to.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be really hard. But we can
yeah.
get it out there. And then finally, will you ever date men again?
I don't see myself doing that, and I'm in a long-term relationship with a woman, so unless she kicks me to the curb, it's not even going to come up. So,
right. Well, Shamika, any last words for you?
No, I don't think so. I do think though that you, Shannon, saying that you don't like masculine men, or like you've never really been into them, and that you dated women, kind of helped me understand how it was so easy for you to kind of give him that support initially. It made it clearer for me.
Right. I have talked to a lot of women who, say they wouldn't have even gone there because they just prefer a much more masculine man, and it's much harder for them to get across that.
And the key is not really, I mean, how unusual that may be, but the fact that you did all that and it didn't work because there was no fixing it from that standpoint. The fix would have been, I guess, therapy probably, or, a reality check, but that never came, right? Oh, I guess I do have one other question. Do you ever talk to Jamie?
No, Jamie.
Oh no, where'd you go?
Jamie doesn't speak to me, and that started pretty quickly after our divorce. So that was Jamie's decision.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, she is Shannon Thrace, the trans widow and author of 18 Months, a memoir of a marriage lost to gender identity. There's the book right there. Thanks for holding it up. Get a copy. Shannon, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm saving the day from you commies who lame, no, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to save. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to save, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.